The night slayed. My mother-in-law's financial advisor, the most expensive man in any room he walked into, looked at the document on the conference table and said, "Is that really her?" in a voice that barely made it past his own collar. The boardroom went so quiet I could hear the ventilation system clicking on in the ceiling. My mother-in-law was still smiling. She had been smiling for the past 6 minutes, which was how long it had taken her to lay out what she believed was my total destruction. She thought the silence meant she had won. She had never been more wrong about anything in her life. My name is Neve. I am 29 years old, and for the past 3 years, I have been what the Dunmore family refers to as Damon's wife, which in their private language meant something positioned just above tolerated and just below invisible. My mother-in-law, Mirabelle, is the kind of woman who can dismiss you entirely with the angle of her chin. My brother-in-law, Arlo, is the kind of man who brags about his golf handicap in the same breath he uses to remind you that your opinion doesn't hold weight in this room. And my husband Damon is the particular kind of person who never actively hurts you. He simply declines to stop it from happening. The Dunmore family made their name in commercial real estate. Damon's father, Edmund, had built the company from almost nothing in the early 90s. One apartment complex, then another, then a run of office parks that caught the right market at the right time. By the time I entered the family, Dunmore Properties held a mixed portfolio of commercial towers, mixed-use developments, and several high-end condominium projects up and down the eastern seaboard. When Edmund died 18 months into my marriage, he left it equally to Mirabelle and both his sons. He did not leave me anything. Mirabelle mentioned this at family dinners on 4 separate occasions. Always in the presence of others, always phrased as a simple fact with no heat attached to it, which was somehow worse than if she had been cruel about it. The smaller humiliations had been ongoing since before the wedding. At a dinner for 12 at the Dunmore house the previous spring, Mirabelle had asked me, in front of a commercial banker and 2 city council members, what my professional background actually was, as though she had never been told. When I answered, she nodded slowly and said, "That's nice," in the tone people use for children's drawings. At a company event the previous fall, Arlo had referred to me across a table full of colleagues as the accountant. Not as an insult exactly, just as a label, a filing system, a way of making clear I existed in a category that didn't require further thought. I had looked at him and smiled and said nothing and gone back to my sparkling water, and he had already moved on by the time the sentence was finished. That is the thing about being underestimated systematically. After a while, you stop trying to correct the record. You just keep building. The night everything came apart for the Dunmore family began as a gala at the Harwick Hotel downtown, the grand launch event for their biggest development yet, a 32-story luxury residential tower called Harwick Place, the cornerstone of what they were calling a public offering in the spring. 200 guests. The kind of ballroom that smells like real flowers and old money and someone's very deliberate ambition. I had received the invitation as a formality, the same way you include a piece of furniture in a photograph because it happens to be in the room. I arrived 40 minutes late, which I had calculated carefully as the interval that would allow me to enter without becoming the arrival. It did not work. Mirabelle spotted me before I reached the coat check. She came across the room holding 2 champagne flutes, her country club friend Francine trailing a step behind, and she said with a wide, warm, carrying voice, "Neve, you wore the gray dress again." She handed one flute to Francine, not to me. She turned away to greet someone else before I could respond, and Francine gave me the quick, cataloging look of a woman who has already decided where to file a stranger, then moved on. I found my assigned seat in the far back corner near the service corridor, and I watched the room from there. I watched the investors work the tables. I watched Arlo move through the crowd with the practiced ease of a man who had been performing confidence since adolescence. I watched Mirabelle receive compliments with the particular grace of someone who has accepted that admiration is simply her natural state. I watched Damon laugh at someone's joke near the bar, and I thought, not for the first time, that he was genuinely good at parties, that he had the gift of making people feel interesting, and that he had never once applied that gift to me. Dinner came and went. The speeches started. Mirabelle thanked the investors, then the mayor's liaison, then the architects. Arlo took the microphone after the dessert plates were cleared. He talked about legacy. He talked about vision. He had a particular talent for making things sound inevitable in retrospect, as though the family had always been moving toward this moment, and the crowd was lucky to witness it. Then he set down his champagne flute. "We have some difficult news to share tonight," Arlo said, and his voice dropped into the specific register he reserved for important occasions. Measured, somber, practiced. In preparing for the Harwick Place public offering, our financial team identified a serious breach of trust. Confidential development materials, architectural schematics, projected revenue models, contractor agreements were accessed without authorization and shared with a rival acquisitions firm. We have spent 4 months tracing the source of that breach. He paused. He looked at me across the length of the ballroom. The source is my sister-in-law. It takes 4 seconds for 200 people to redirect their attention, I counted. Mirabelle rose from her chair in ivory silk. She said they had documentation. She said they had internal emails and access logs, and a financial trail that was thorough and irrefutable. She said the family was giving me the opportunity, tonight, in front of everyone who mattered to them, to take responsibility for what I had done. An assistant I had never seen materialized beside my chair and placed a single sheet of paper on the table. A corporate disclosure form, neat and official, with a signature line at the bottom and a pen beside it. I looked at the form. I looked at the pen. I looked over at the head table, where Damon was holding his empty champagne flute and studying the wood grain of the table in front of him with tremendous attention. He did not look at me, not once. I picked up the pen. Here is what I need to tell you about the 4 months before that night. When I first discovered what Arlo had been doing with the Harwick Place development budget, the inflated contractor invoices, the payments to vendors that did not exist anywhere, except on paper, the steady extraction of funds into an account registered in the maiden name of his wife, Darcy. I did not call a lawyer. I did not go to Damon. I did not confront Arlo at a family dinner, which would have been satisfying for approximately 4 minutes and then catastrophic for far longer. I went home to the apartment I had maintained in my own name since before the wedding, a fact Damon knew and had never questioned, which itself told me something important. And I sat down at the desk I had bought at an estate sale, and I made one phone call. The person on the other end was a man named Theron. He has been my chief of operations for 4 years. He works out of an 8th-floor office in Midtown, leased under a subsidiary holding company that most people in the financial world would not recognize if they read it off a letterhead. He is exact, discreet, and exceptionally capable at the work we do together, which is the acquisition of distressed commercial debt. We buy the defaulted notes that banks need to remove from their balance sheets. We buy them at substantial discounts, and we hold them or restructure them, or, when circumstances call for it, we call them in at full value. The entity through which we work is called the Meridian Group. I started it when I was 24. With $60,000, I had saved over 2 years of entry-level financial analysis work, and the sale proceeds from a duplex I had inherited from my grandmother. I bought my first delinquent mortgage note at a county auction on a Tuesday morning in March, sitting in a folding chair in a government building, wearing the only blazer I owned. I sold that note 14 months later for a return I will not quote because it sounds improbable, and I immediately reinvested every dollar. Then again. I ate a lot of toast in those years. I kept the office small and the overhead smaller. I did not tell anyone what I was doing because I had learned early that people respond to a woman building something quietly in one of two ways. They want to advise it, or they want a piece of it, and I did not have time for either. By the time I walked into the Dunmore family home as Damon's new wife, Meridian had closed transactions totaling more than $40 million. The Dunmore family looked at my gray dress and my off-brand shoes and saw exactly what I needed them to see. The Harwick Place development had been financed through a consortium of 3 regional banks. When I called Theron the night I discovered Arlo's records, the first question I asked was whether any of those construction notes were trading at a discount on the secondary market. 2 were. The third we negotiated directly with the lending institution over a period of 6 weeks, at a premium we were willing to absorb for strategic reasons. By the night of the gala, Meridian Group held majority creditor position on $63 million in Harwick Place construction debt. The document Mirabelle's assistant placed in front of me that evening was not the document Slade had prepared. The original had been swapped out 4 minutes before my arrival by members of my security team who operate with a precision I have spent years funding and refining. The replacement was visually identical to Slade's corporate disclosure form. The difference was in the operative language buried in paragraph 7. The document I signed was not a confession of corporate espionage. It was a creditor authorization form releasing Meridian Group's full collection rights on the Harwick Place debt, effective immediately upon filing with the relevant federal regulatory authority. I signed it with the mark I use on contracts that carry real weight, compact and forward-leaning, ending with a specific slash through the final character that functions as a kind of watermark. Small, unremarkable unless you know exactly what you're looking for. I set down the pen. A security guard I had never met walked me through the kitchen and out through a side exit into the October night. The door swung shut behind me. Through the hotel's exterior wall, I could hear the sound of applause beginning again. I walked 3 blocks to the parking structure. In the elevator, I entered my secondary phone's passcode and called Theron. I told him the document was signed and the chain of custody was intact. He told me Arlo would file it with the Securities and Exchange Commission by Thursday at the latest. Arlo was constitutionally incapable of waiting for a second legal opinion when he believed he was winning. He would file it himself, first thing, and he would feel excellent about it. The following week was extraordinary to observe from a distance. On Tuesday, Dunmore Properties' lead construction lender received a Meridian Group creditor priority notice and placed the project's draw schedule on immediate administrative hold. On Wednesday evening, a 14-page financial summary, fully sourced, fully documented, arrived in the inbox of the Federal Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. On Thursday morning, the account registered to Darcy's maiden name was frozen. By Friday afternoon, Mirabelle was giving a composed press statement about a temporary operational review and a postponed offering date. She had not yet been told what the Meridian Group was. I know this because the call where she was told did not happen until Monday morning in Slade's office, and I know what was said in that call because Theron's monitoring team had been very thorough. Slade called an emergency board meeting for Tuesday at 9. He told Mirabelle she needed to be there. She brought Arlo. Arlo brought Darcy, which I noted. Darcy in the original wool coat she'd worn to Edmund's memorial. Details tell you more than statements every time. I took the elevator to the top floor at 9:04, 4 minutes after the scheduled start, carrying a single slim portfolio. No attorney beside me, no paralegal with a rolling cart of files, just the portfolio and the white blazer. The room changed when I walked in. Not dramatically. There was no gasp, no movie pause. It was subtler than that, a shift in the quality of attention. The way a room feels different when the barometric pressure changes and you know before any other evidence that the weather is about to turn. Mirabelle recovered first as she always did. She looked at me with the expression she had refined over 3 years. The one that communicated that acknowledging my presence was itself a favor she was not required to extend. And she said I was not a party to this meeting, that the matter had already been resolved through proper legal channels, and that she would have someone from security assist me back to the lobby if I didn't leave in the next 30 seconds. I have a creditor interest in this meeting, I said. I sat down at the far end of the table. Slade looked up from his papers. I let the silence sit exactly as long as it needed to. Then I opened the portfolio and placed 3 documents in the center of the table. The Meridian Group Debt Acquisition Summary, the creditor authorization the family had filed with the SEC on my behalf, believing it was a confession, and the 14-page financial analysis that was currently attached to an active federal inquiry. Dunmore Properties carries $63 million in construction debt on Harwick Place, I said. As of last Tuesday, the Meridian Group holds majority creditor position on that debt. The Meridian Group is the acquisitions firm your family publicly accused me of leaking plans to. I let that arrange itself in the room. It is also my company. That is not possible, Arlo said. He said it quietly, which told me more than shouting would have. Slade was not looking at Arlo. He was looking at the creditor authorization, the document the Dunmore family had filed with the SEC themselves, certain they were filing my destruction. He was looking at the signature. He had seen a Meridian Group filing 14 months earlier, when a different client of his had been on the receiving end of a debt acquisition he had not managed to prevent. He remembered the signature from that filing, the compressed letters, the forward pressure, the specific slash through the final character. He was a man who had spent 2 decades reading signatures on instruments worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And he was now looking at 2 signatures and understanding that they were the same hand. He set the document down with great care. He removed his glasses, pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose, put his glasses back on, and looked at me across the length of the table. "Is that really her?" he said. Just above a whisper, not addressed to anyone in the room in particular. A man talking to himself in the presence of a fact that had just rearranged everything. Mirabelle turned to look at him. "What are you talking about?" He did not answer her, he was looking at me. And in the change of his expression, not fear exactly, but the specific, settling recognition of a man who has fully understood the dimensions of a miscalculation, I knew that he knew. What followed did not take long, in the way that things which have been years in preparation often resolve quickly. Darcy stood when I reached the 3rd page of the financial summary. The specific vendor payments, the account registration, the transfer history laid out in 12 rows of clean figures. And she walked out of the room without speaking to anyone, without closing the door behind her, without a backward glance at her husband. Arlo watched her go. Something in his face went to pieces in the seconds after the door clicked shut, a kind of structural failure, and then he started talking. He said the documentation was fabricated. He said I had manipulated the filing process. He said there were legal protections the company could invoke. None of it held. The board members were quiet in the way people are quiet when they are already calculating how far from a building they need to stand when it comes down. The federal agents had been waiting in the lobby since 8:30, as it turned out. Mirabelle tried 3 separate approaches as the meeting deteriorated around her. She said the authorization I had signed was obtained under duress, which had the problem of being untrue and of not addressing the debt acquisition which had been executed weeks earlier. She said she had relationships with people who could intervene at the regulatory level, and I watched Slade look at the floor when she said it, which told me what she had and hadn't discussed with him in advance. She said that this was not over, which was true in the narrow legal sense that proceedings of this kind take time, and false in every practical sense that mattered. Damon sat at the side wall through all of it. He did not speak. He watched his brother be walked out by 2 men who produced credentials at the door. and he watched his mother's composure come undone in careful, visible increments. Not all at once, but piece by piece, like a hem that has been pulling for years and finally lets go entirely. He watched Slade collect his materials in silence and leave without addressing anyone at the table. And then he turned and looked at me for what felt like a long time, though I could not have told you exactly how long. I did not give him anything to hold on to. I had been doing that reflexively for 3 years, offering small reassurances, softening difficult moments, absorbing the cost of other people's behavior so the atmosphere stayed manageable. I had run out. I picked up my portfolio, buttoned my blazer, and left. I did not drive past the Dunmore estate for several weeks. When I finally did, it was unintentional. I was on my way to a meeting on the other side of the city, and the route took me past it. The iron gates were padlocked. A county assessor's notice was taped to the post. The circular driveway was empty. The fountain that Mirabelle always ran through October and November, because she said the sound was civilizing, had been turned off, and the basin had begun to fill with leaves. I noticed it, and then the light changed, and I drove through the intersection, and that was the end of it. That is the part of this I could not have anticipated when I was 24 years old. Eating toast at a second-hand desk and reading through mortgage default filings on a Saturday night. The Dunmore family was never the reason I built Meridian. I built it because the work needed doing and no one was going to hand it to me. What happened between us was a consequence of their own choices. Arlo's extraction, Mirabelle's strategy, the document Damon never looked up to question. I just held the debt. I just read the fine print all the way to the end. The thing about people who mistake your silence for weakness is that they make every decision based on a version of you that stopped existing a long time ago. And by the time they understand that, the math is already done. If you know what it is to be in the room and have nobody in it actually see you, I'd like to hear your story. Leave it in the comments. And if you believe, like I do, that becoming undeniable is the only form of revenge worth the effort, subscribe. I am not finished yet.